Hi everyone. I was going to do a live feed, but I have chosen not to. I chickened out primarily because I was like to stuff it up. So I'm just doing a recorded one, which I'll probably send to you as if it was live anyway. Won't do any editing, you'll just get the raw stuff. So that's why I've got the top here going live. I'm not really. But I am wanting to talk about a number of issues that have been happening here in Australia and around the world. And thought I'd just have this conversation with you. What I've been doing though recently is I've been scripting a lot of what I've needed to say, making them only 5 or 6 minutes, those videos. I'd like to really thank those people that have subscribed, and I'd like to remind you to subscribe to my channel when possible. That would be really great. And also contact me in the comment section below if there's anything you'd like to tell me, criticise me. A lot of people tend to, but that's okay as well. So one of the key issues at the moment is Albanese traipsing around the world, firstly to the United States, and then today, or over the weekend, he's been in China. We'll be there for a couple of days, and whether or not he's actually serving Australia at all well. Well, interestingly enough, today on Insiders on the ABC, I think the overwhelming response from those on the panel with PK was that he was. Interestingly enough, though, there are a number of criticisms on Twitter, X, whatever you call it, YZ, whatever you like to call the bloody program. But there were some comments there saying that they still thought that the ABC was biased. And I sit back and think, what in the hell are you expecting them to do? I looked at and was presented with the same information that you were, and I didn't think that it had anything in it that appeared to be remotely biased. But clearly, people do. So get your act together. I think really what happens here is that there are so many people that are critical of the ABC that they just have this filter that says, I don't care who it is that's doing the presenting. At the end of the day, I'm going to believe that the ABC is corrupt. They've got all these people coming over from Sky, namely Spears and PK, and I'm going to criticise them regardless. Go for it. I don't agree with a lot of those criticisms. I think David Spears is quite reasonable, and I think PK is exceptional. So, and I do need to highlight the fact that Patricia Karvelas gets a lot of negative sprays from people who are anti-LGBTQ plus people because she herself is gay. So I think she's fabulous. Dish out the shit as much as you like. I think that she's a person who rises to the occasion actually and presents extremely well. A lot of people don't, so be it. Now, one of the problems we've got with Albanese's travel is that for some reason, people seem to think that he's doing a lot of it. A lot more than what he should. Of course, I don't know what he should means, that's one thing. And the other thing too that I think confuses me is he hasn't been on as many trips as Morrison did when he first came to power. He is representing Australia in the best ways that he can in terms of the way we choose to represent ourselves in the front of the United States. An issue that I kind of had a problem with because I think it's about time we did our own thing, didn't rely on the United States to help us, and he's certainly going to China in order to improve our trade relations. Both efforts need to be applauded, not necessarily criticised just because he seems to be out of the country. The other thing that really fascinates me is that for whatever reason, the Liberal Party seem to believe that he is a person who has sole control over whatever happens in the country, and that when he's not here, for whatever reason, the country seems to fall apart. That there seems to be this vacuum that's caused when Albanese isn't in the room. And as a result of that, all things will fail, whether it be energy crisis, whether it be the standard of living, whether it be batteries placed in EV vehicles, who knows. But either way, the system is going to fail simply because he's not in the country. It's almost like once he leaves the country, it's like when the cat leaves the room, the mouse will play. So the bureaucrats and everybody else obviously go on holidays. They don't process your Centrelink payments or any other benefits that you may wish to receive. Once he's out of the room, that's it. They're all on a break. Also, it means that his ministers must also be on a break when he's out of the room as well. I find that a wee bit disturbing because clearly we're paying them to do their job. But according to most people, or some people on the right, once he leaves the room, that is it. is no longer available to anybody, and the whole system, which is supposedly created around him, crumbles. And we, as a result, you and I, the poor taxpayer, we're the ones that will suffer. What a load of bullshit that is. But that's the impression that you get from the right wing. Any effort to be able to create havoc, to criticise, particularly people like Susan Lane and Peter Dutton. The people that create nothing, do nothing, talk about nothing, yet on the other hand believe that they're the best alternative for government, something that won't happen. And one of the other things too, I just want to talk about briefly that has happened, is that Dutton Dutton and the right wing for that matter, and particularly Sky News, making statements in relation to Albanese's support and favouritism and all that sort of crap. At the moment, the focus seems to be on the fact that in some of these seats which he won last election, that those electorates are turning against him. This is regardless of the fact that in the last news poll, he increased by 3%, up to 56% or something like that, and Dutton decreased by 2%. So regardless of the failure of the referendum, conversation about that later, but regardless of the failure of the referendum, it is clear that that Albo is not out of favour with the public. Yet at every opportunity you find the right wing wanting to push that particular barrow. And I don't think it's really going to hold much water at the end of the day, because when the election comes around in about 18 months' time, the Australian public will know Albo pretty well by then and what his government's doing, and I'm sure that they will elect him in. And I think that in the meantime, my prediction is that Dutton will be on his way out, if not sacked beforehand. But then the problem that the Liberal Party have is that whoever follows after Dutton, as terrible as he is probably worse than he is. So they're not going to be able to garner any further votes. As a result, it's just going to be a bigger mess than it is. And I suspect that they'll be in opposition for a long time, simply because there's nobody that sits behind Dutton who could possibly ever take the job on and represent Australian people as they want to be represented. So just want to move to a number of the issues that I've kind of already raised, but which I think are extremely relevant. Now, there's a lovely article in the Saturday paper. Just need to make this point. I don't subscribe to any Murdoch press anymore, and I only watch Sky News. Will not subscribe to that. Got rid of Prime because I will not subscribe to anything that's associated with Sky News and the Murdoch press. Sorry, not Prime, Binge. So get rid of everything that you can think of, because there's plenty of news sources elsewhere. And one of the best places to get news sources, if you live in your own little private little bubble, is certainly on Twitter or one of the social media type accounts. So that's what I've chosen to do. But the Saturday paper came up with a really interesting article by John Hewson. Now, I was never a great fan of John Hewson when he was in the Liberal Party, and particularly not a great fan of him when he was in opposition. However, I think he probably would have made a good Prime Minister. It's a bit like Malcolm Turnbull in a way. He's a moderate within the Liberal Party, something they cannot stand. And since leaving the Liberal Party, just like Turnbull, he's become a little bit more, I don't know, a little bit more left, I suspect. Heaven forbid, maybe some people will start to refer to him as a communist or a socialist. However, he is further on the left these days. And he came out with some interesting comments in relation to Albanese's trip to the United States and his meeting with Biden. And in those statements, he made a few interesting associations, I think. And I'll bring this up so that we can have a look at it. So he went back and he talked about Harold Holt. And those of you that are old enough will remember that Harold Holt went for a swim one day and never returned. And that is still one of the greatest mysteries ever yet to be solved here in Australia. But he did point out the fact that Harold Holt went to the United States and made the same sort of statements to him, and he made the same sort of statements to him about the war in the Vietnam War. We'll be with you. You'll be all the way with JFK or whatever it was, John B. Lind, whatever, I forget now. And so, as a result of that, this has been the stance that Australia tends to have taken for many years. Now, there is a slight movement away from that, I think. There's this movement that says we no longer require or have the need to require to be as dedicated and as in step with the United States as we have in the past, that we can actually strive to be completely independent from them. Holt explained that it intended to light-hearted gesture of goodwill towards a generous host, and that was the way he captured what he said in relation to Johnson. Albanese's sentiments seem to have been similar. He drew on a reported statement by Biden's now-deceased son, Beau. Australia in the end is the enviable position. I like this, but Australia is in the enviable position of not having to choose between the US and China. We can and should have effective relationships with each, both to our benefit and to the global benefit. And I think this is an important issue that we need to start to think about. We need to realise that we're a significant nation. We're not a big nation. We don't have a massive population. We do, though, have a lot of minerals that the rest of the world requires. So we do have some bargaining chips. But we are not the greatest nation in terms of military build-up or military force. But we are a significant nation because of where we sit in the world, and because somehow we're sitting primarily as the major Western nation apart from Japan, between China and the United States. And because before us sits a whole lot of water, including towards the Chinese Sea and the Sea of Tonkin, namesake, then we have a lot of power and we have a lot of influence that we can wield as a result. Also, there's a lot of things that we could trade with the rest of the world, and it was evident that when Morrison decided to kick the Chinese in the teeth, and tariffs were imposed and a whole host of other things, and goods were restricted from being imported back into China, we have now been able to change some of those issues. We've now been able to at least start to negotiate getting some of those goods exported. So, and that, I think, is a good thing. Now, one of the other issues that I did want to talk about, if I could bring this up as well, is really about I can't find it now. That's right, it was about this issue around John Howard. So John Howard travelled to the UK to a conference at which he decided that he was going to talk about multiculturalism. And his view, unbeknown to the rest of us, was that multiculturalism is kind of a waste of time, apart from the fact that we need people in Australia and that those people need to be assimilated as soon as possible, and that whatever their cultural beliefs are, they need to be shunted out the door, and we need to bring in Western views of how they should be, how they should act, how they should behave, I guess what even religion they belong to. Who knows what this man actually does think. And so he took this what was surprisingly anti-cultural, anti-multicultural view about immigration. And so he said, and I'll bring this up for you, he said, multiculturalism is a concept that has always troubled me. Well, we didn't know that actually, John, but thanks for reminding us. I take the view that if people want to emigrate to Australia, then they adopt the values and practices of that country, and in return they're entitled to have the host citizenry respect their culture without trying to create some kind of federation of tribes and culture. You get in terrible trouble with that. So he's talking there about people that are coming into our country and then forming their own little cliques. I've got an issue for John that perhaps he's never really thought about. And if you go to Melbourne, you'll find that there's a very large Greek community. In fact, it's the largest Greek community outside of Greece itself. Now, they have got a little enclave, if you like, of Greeks that sit there, have their coffee, go to the same sort of churches, associate with each other. Now, I'm wondering whether John is thinking that perhaps the Greek community, and so to some extent Italian communities, and particularly some Asian communities, and then we've got the Middle East type communities, and the Palestinians and the Jewish community. So maybe all those communities should no longer have their cultural connections, which are important to them, but they should separate them somehow and be more like us, whatever the us looks like. Because the us that I believe we should be thinking about is not that sort of shit that Howard's talking about. That us that we should be looking at is what all of those groups make in terms of Australia, how we appear to other people. We are the largest multicultural country in the world. In other words, we have a swath of people that come elsewhere to live here. And they come to live here because we are a great country. Funny enough, it isn't funny enough, but my wife and I were sitting down having a conversation about this just the other day, about how fortunate we are to be living here, given what's happening in Gaza and the Middle East right at the moment. Another subject I'll talk about shortly. But we need to understand that here in Australia, we are so fortunate. We don't have the range of problems that other countries have that have got a whole host of borders around them. They've got different countries with different beliefs that are wanting to take over, wanting to manipulate and to control. We don't have those same issues because we're surrounded by water. The largest continent that's surrounded by water, largest island, if you like, in the world is Australia. And we don't have problems with our closest Muslim neighbour, which is Indonesia, which is the largest Muslim population on earth. So we are blessed in that sense. Other countries are not so blessed. And the other thing too that I think we need to raise about other countries is that they have histories. Those countries in the Middle East have histories that go back thousands and thousands of years. And there's a lot of biblical references, obviously, to those particular countries and the people that live there. But here in Australia, we don't have that. Or do we? We do. Because the irony for me is that we have 60,000 years of history that belongs to Indigenous people, and we discount that. Yet, when we look at what's happening in Asia, or Middle East I should say, we forget that their issues, the way they view themselves, the way they construct themselves, the way land is represented to them, entitlement is represented to them, and their history, which to a large extent is written down, their history means a lot to them. And we see that as extremely significant. But when it comes to Indigenous people, we don't give a shit. Because they haven't, in some person's view, not my view, but in some person's view, they hadn't evolved like the countries in the Middle East have and elsewhere around the world. That they were stuck in their way of living. And as Westerners, we see that as totally wrong, and that, of course, we invaded this country in order to change all of that, because basically how we viewed them was as non-people. So it interests me, though, this comparison, I think, between Australia and the Middle East and how their history impacts them, and it's doing so today, when the history that sits with Indigenous people is insignificant for us because we voted no to the referendum. So any comments about any of that, please make them below, and also please subscribe to my channel for further useless comments. And this is an interesting article too, which was in The Guardian. Again, not subscribing to The Australian, The Advertiser, or any other media put out by the terrible, embarrassing to think that he that he started his thing in Adelaide with the Adelaide Advertiser. But Murdoch, I was going to say something nasty about him, but I'll try to avoid that. So Tanya Plibersek accuses Peter Dutton of killing people's faith in government. Now, I do need to admit, bit of a fan of Tanya, like the way she does her thing, like the way she speaks, and really was disappointed to some extent that she didn't get a better portfolio than she did, which is the environment portfolio. But on the other hand, I think she's doing an outstanding job. Senior Government Minister Tanya Plibersek has accused Peter Dutton of seeking to kick the underdog when they're down and killing people's faith in government as Labor targets the opposition leader ahead of the next election. Plibersek will use a speech at Labor's state conference in Western Australia on Saturday. Already passed, haven't heard anything about that. The poisonous politics of no. So this is where, and I don't know whether Australians are really aware of this all that much, but there certainly is an effort by the Liberal Party and the National Party to promote nothing. Now, I know that in government we haven't normally had agreements between all sides. I know that it's even, one could argue it's rare to have some sense of bipartisanship. But when you've got a government when you've got a government who implements progressive policies and is endeavouring to cut down on energy prices and the standard of living and inflation and a whole host of things, housing, homelessness, for example, the fact that we have a government that is looking to all those things which are in our best interest, and we have a Conservative opposition who simply refuse to accept or to do anything that is going to favour the population. Now, I would imagine that if the Liberal Party and the Nationals accepted some of the proposals that the Labor were putting forward and advocated for them and talked about them in favourable terms, they'd win a few votes. But because they're the party of no, so if you don't know, was their slogan, don't vote for Dutton, because the man is full of no's. And so I think that the Liberal Party is missing out on a wonderful opportunity to be able to win over the Australian people, but they're blowing it. And at the moment, Dutton's in the tank. So, and then there's this question as to why Dutton went to India. No one seems to know. So there's this interesting Twitter post I noticed earlier where Dutton was, he was doing something for young children that had eyesight issues. And someone had posted, well, if he was that concerned about Indian kids in India, why wasn't he just as concerned about Australian Indigenous kids in Australia? Good point. So this article goes on to say a politics that can only destroy and corrode, that can only tear things down, but can never be building up, she said. The next federal election will not be held till May 2025. Both major parties appear to be testing campaign-style messaging and attacks on the opponent. And this is an interesting point because from the referendum and Win the No campaign, it's quite clear now that the Labor Party will be focused on presenting their case in terms of the positives that have all happened, and their agenda, whereas the Liberal Party will make it a personal event. So they'll attack people because of their size, their weight, their eating habits, how often they fart in public. They'll be looking for anything they can find, as obscure as that might be, in order to criticise their opposition. And they will not be able to say, as I just said, they will not be able to say that they have been able to advocate for and vote with the government around policies that have been helpful to the community. And of course, the other issue that exists right at this particular point in time in this so-called election cycle is that they won't produce any policies whatsoever. So it's all negativity and it's all criticism. So it goes on to say, while coalition politicians have strongly criticised Prime Minister Anthony Albanese, recent schedule of foreign trips and accused him of being distracted from the cost of living crisis. Just discussed that with you. It's not all about him. The Labor government has sought to more regularly highlight negative aspects of controversies from Dutton's time in government, which they have done, and rightfully so, because the man has Minister for Foreign Affairs, he fucked it up big time, and that there's lots of evidence now that's coming out that's indicating that he didn't do a very good job, and that there are less people coming to Australia, sorry, that's not true. People coming to Australia who, or people not being, I'll get it right in a second, people not allowed to come to Australia simply because they have not met the appropriate criteria, or that there are issues in terms of drugs, alcohol, people smuggling, and a whole host of other issues that will keep them out of Australia, which before the Liberal government allowed them to enter. So a lot of stuff being talked about there. That's right. So she goes on to say, apparently in this speech which she gave yesterday, a man whose life mission is to block progress to Stoke Division, best if I show you what I'm reading, to tick the underdog when they're down, a man who stands in front of our opportunities and says no, purpose it will say for the opposition leader. This is a man who boycotted Kevin Rudd's apology to the stolen. I love this because this is an issue that they raise continually, and I reckon rightfully so. This is a man who boycotted Kevin Rudd's apology to the stolen generations, boycotting in the process basic standards of human decency. And I couldn't agree more, because there's nothing as indecent as that particular man. He's actually revolting. Now I just want to jump to, now I hope this isn't boring you too much. If it is, fucking leave. But Australian Jewish group holds vigils for peace in Sydney and Melbourne. And this is interesting because, I need to take a drink now. The ceasefire is being called, so I think the Americans are saying pause, Australia's saying pause, but many people really are crying out for a ceasefire. And and in fact, it's very disappointing that the Australian government showed their lack of commitment to this issue by abstaining from the vote in the United Nations in relation to what's happening in Gaza. It's appalling. I've done a couple of videos on this if you care to check them out. But basically, we need to make a stand against any violence, no matter who's implementing it. And I can understand that the United States is a bit wary because Lebanon's likely to get involved. Some of the other Arab nations are, and particularly Iran, will see this as an opportunity to destroy and to eradicate Israel, which I don't agree with either. But I do think we need to highlight the atrocities that Israel has caused against people in the West Bank and, of course, now the people in Gaza. And that there needs to be a two-state solution, and that someone needs to find out which bits of land are going to be divided and how they're going to be divided. And Israel needs to get the settlers out of the West Bank, because that's against the Charter of the United Nations. So, and how many of these countries have actually broken the law, international law? Every one of them has. Will they ever be held to account? No. Netanyahu may be, because what may happen is that his government may be kicked out. There's a lot of unrest in Israel at the moment. And the other thing to remember, I think, is that this isn't always about, people get upset about this Jew thing. It isn't always about Jews. There are lots of people in Israel who are not Jewish. And it should never be about Jews anyway. The tropes and the other negative stuff that's said about Jewish people I find horrific. They're just as entitled as anybody else to live and to conduct their religion in whichever form they like, whether you're Jehovah's Witness or Christian or whatever your religious faith is, just do it. The fact that there seems to be such a terrible degree of hatred towards this poor group of people that have been victimised for so long, and they do not necessarily represent the government. of Israel. In fact, to some extent, they don't. Decision to gather in public on Wednesday night. So this is an interesting article. Decision to gather in public on Wednesday night was a deliberate one to highlight the first Jewish grouping in Australia to call for a ceasefire in the Israel-Hamas war. And that's the best way to put it. The Israel-Hamas war. Not the Jewish or the Arab war, but the Israeli-Hamas war. The release of hostages and freedom and justice for all in Israel and Palestine. A similar gathering was in St Kilda, Melbourne, echoed the call for peace. Eve Altman, one of the people who organised the gathering in Sydney, said the idea for a vigil had spurred from grassroots conversations with friends in the Jewish community. They expected no more than a dozen, but supporters continued to get on board until numbers exceeded 150 in the two cities. These are really horrific and difficult times, she told the crowd. I've personally had a number of conversations over the last few days with people in our community who are feeling really isolated right now, who haven't seen their values, who haven't seen their values, a call to end violence and protect civilian life, reflecting mainstream discussions about this war. This is what motivated us to organise this vigil and this Kaddish night. We're not alone, and if we work together, we can push for change. And I think that's an important message, is that, and that's where the world is now turning. It's now moving towards this space that sits more around changing this attitude, not making it a Jewish versus Arab attitude, but makes it an attitude or a belief system that says, if you're going to destroy people, if you're going to destroy a country, we should take over a country, then any side that abuses and kills innocent citizens, innocent civilians, they are liable for that, and it is a war crime, and should be held account, regardless of which side of the spectre you sit on. And we need to think for a moment, you know, if the Australian government decided to, I don't know, let's say the same government decided for whatever reason to occupy Papua New Guinea, and we saw that our troops and our government were just hammering villages and killing people willy-nilly, what would our attitude be towards that? My guess is we'd be horrified, and that we would do whatever we could to put an end to it. In fact, I don't believe any of our governments would ever take that as a possibility. But in issues of war, when we get involved with the United States or Britain or whoever it is, we often find ourselves in war situations where we're doing that. And so that's probably one of the reasons why we should never go into a war anyway. But where we're blanketly killing innocent people, then there are times that we should take stock of ourselves and make a decision as a community what sort of politicians we want representing us. Hopefully, we'll never get into that situation again, which hopefully means we'll never ever go to war with the United States or any other country simply because they've asked us. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Subscribe to my channel. Thanks for being with me for this rant. I've gone for 30 minutes, which is probably long enough. And I look forward to, I'll be doing more and more of these videos throughout this coming week. And I hope that you can subscribe to my channel. In the meantime, take care, look after yourselves, and be safe.